We are biological creatures, first and foremost. We are species, we are animals, we're primates. Sometimes we behave more apish than others, but we definitely have that as part of our social history. And I hope to convince you in the next 45 minutes or so that justice is a behavior that we do. It's a instinct. It's a drive that we have that's very deep-seated. And I hope at the end of this, to bring this full circle, to talk about how we can do it better. Because there are lots of behaviors that we do that we don't do very well. And I think justice is one of those. And we don't need to look very far to see examples of us not doing it well. Hopefully there's a positive message at the end of all this, which we could all use right now. I sought to answer this question in a very backwards way. I started writing this book trying to get to the answer of why are humans so different? Because we have shared ancestry with all of the other animals on the planet, and we're descended from common ancestors with other creatures not that long ago, really, in the grand scheme of things. But how did we get so different so fast? And what I found after 3 years of research is that, as the title of the book gives away, that I was framing the question exactly backwards. We are not so different, actually, and much of what exists in our complex social milieu, this culture, this language that we have, is just a smokescreen for very simple, basic drives and instincts. And that's what the book's all about. I'm not going to talk about all of those today. I'm just going to talk about a couple. If I talk about all of it, then you wouldn't need to buy the book. Why would you buy the book if I cover it all? So I'm just here to talk about justice because, like I said, that's what unifies us as a community, and hopefully, at our best, it's what unifies us as a species. Now, before you talk about what biology has to say about justice, we have to sort of agree on a definition of justice. And I sought a definition of justice in the dictionary and in textbooks on criminal justice, and some of my colleagues here, some of them are here today, I asked them what their definition of justice was. Got a lot of different kinds of answers, but they all sort of fell into two components, or two modalities with several components within them. And those two modalities are fairness and moral righteousness. So hopefully this isn't controversial, no one would disagree with this. So the first aspect of fairness has to do with equity, equal treatment, but also on a system of rules. You need, if you're going to have a just society, you have to have a set of rules that we all agree on, we play by those rules. And then of course, and these are norms, these are laws, however you want to say that. Then of course you have to have a way to enforce them. So there needs to be punishment when you don't follow the rules, and there needs to be some coercive rewards if you stay on the right side of the rules. A lot of people will think of that as a purely human thing to do, to write down rules and codify punishments, and I'm going to convince you, hopefully, that that's not at all the case. But that's not enough. Just fairness isn't enough. Justice also consists of what we would call moral righteousness, meaning it's a little bit extra. It's behaviors that are not purely self-directed. So you can be purely self-directed and still agree on equal treatment, because you don't want to be the beneficiary, not the beneficiary, the one who suffers from unequal treatment, right? So that's not enough, but you have to do something a little extra. You have to be at least somewhat other-directed in your behaviors to really be considered a just person. I think most people agree with that. And that encompasses altruism, doing nice things for other people at a cost to yourself, but also empathy and compassion. So these are the components that I think everyone agrees are critical to justice. And fortunately, we have great examples of our animal cousins that engage in all these behaviors. And I think that that's important. So I asked the question, where does justice come from? And philosophers and historians and psychologists and even sociologists will answer it in a very different way than I will. I look at our animal cousins because I'm convinced that it comes already here. It was already pre-programmed in. We were destined to build this kind of society we do, at least when it comes to justice, millions of years ago. And the rest of it is simply codifying rules of justice that were already written in our DNA. Okay, but you might not believe me, so let's get started. So really we have to talk about, I think, equal treatment. You can't have any conversation about justice without starting with this basis of equal treatment, everybody being treated equally. And if we consider that the basic foundation of justice, it also highlights how far we have to come, right? We don't live in a world where everybody starts off with equal treatment. But I think we all at least agree that that should be the foundational components of justice. So the idea that animals would have anything close to this was a foreign idea until fairly recently. But I'd like to show you a classic experiment that was done in capuchin monkeys, and this was published in 2003. Many of you will know this experiment, some of you will anyway, and so I thought about I shouldn't even put it in there. But actually it's so impactful that I think I have to talk about this experiment. So this is an experiment where, with capuchin monkeys who live, they're small, very small, New World monkeys. They live in Central America, the rainforests of Central and South America. These monkeys were trained in this laboratory to perform a task, very simple task. They take a token that's handed to them, remove it, and then they return it, and they're given a treat, they're given a reward. The reward could be a cucumber, the reward could be a grape. They're very happy to do it for either reward. They prefer the grape if you can hand them both, but you can switch back and forth. They're perfectly happy to get the grape. However, something happens when you start to treat them differently. So now I'll show you, make sure this is set up correctly. That should start on its own. These two monkeys are now going to be treated fairly. The monkey on the left, we'll call him monkey number 1. He's going to perform the task and get the cucumber. Very happy to do that. He's eating the cucumber. Everything's fine. Monkey number 2 performs the task. Returns the token. But aha, he gets a grape. Monkey number 1 sees this. Performs the task again. But he's given a cucumber. Monkey number 1 does not like this. Monkey number 2 performs the task again, and once again, a grape. Monkey number 1, so is there something wrong with this token? What am I doing wrong here? Gets it back. Once again, he's going to receive a cucumber. So this goes on for a while, and for the sake of being humane, we'll stop. But the point is that it might start playing it. Okay. The point here is that monkey number 1 recognized unequal treatment and stopped participating in the activity. And if you think about this, it's a very irrational behavior. This is a behavior that calls out for an explanation. Why? Well, here's a monkey who has a resource, has food, has something, and he gets rid of it, right? So he's worse off for having done this. Even more than that, he's thrown it at the person who's in the position to give him future rewards. So if this were a purely self-directed behavior, if animals only think about their own success, if they see other animals as nothing but competitors, what is to be gained from behaving like that? Right? How is this a self-directed behavior? And also, I bet when you saw it, it resonated with you. It felt familiar, didn't it? This irrational temper tantrum is very human-like, I would say, right? And that's what he did. He threw a tantrum. He recognized the unequal treatment and refused to participate. And there's a lot of sort of cognitive things packed in this behavior. Number 1, this monkey has to recognize the inequality. So the two things, remember, he saw both rewards. They were right there in the dish. He got the cucumber and he was happy with it. But when the other monkey got the grape, that's when it tripped something. And that tripped what we would call the justice instinct. He knows he was not being treated fairly, and he refused to participate. Now, when this was published in 2003, the behavior was called intolerance to inequity, meaning animals won't tolerate being treated unfairly. And fast forward a little bit, it's now been discovered in a whole variety of social species. Elephants, dolphins, lots of different monkeys, all of the apes, giraffes, lots of different animals. Dogs, by the way, very cool experiment done with dogs when they perform little trained tasks. They don't even need a treat to perform the task unless you start giving a treat to another dog, and then they quit, right? So it's that inequity. So we are trained. We have this in our DNA to recognize inequality and won't stand for it. But now let's backtrack to 2003. When they published this and titled it that, Intolerance to Inequity, a lot of philosophers and theologians were upset with this, and they wrote letters to the editor and they said, that's not intolerance to inequity, it's pure selfishness. What you would need to see is the monkey refusing the better reward because the comrade is getting cheated. That's what you need to see if you want to see intolerance to inequity. So first of all, I'm not sure that that's a fair point. But second of all, I bet they wish they hadn't put it in writing, because that experiment's now been done. The scientist you saw up there, her name is Sarah Brosnan. She now has her own research group at Georgia State University, and she performed the experiment with chimpanzees. Did the same thing, give them unequal treatment. And guess what? Not always, but sometimes the chimp that got the better reward refused to participate. Not at first, but after a while of it going on, stepped back and refused to participate. So the inequity was recognized whether you're the beneficiary or not. The most interesting part of that study, is actually a follow-up study, is that you can dial down and up this intolerance to inequity based on how closely matched or how closely paired those two chimpanzees are. If they're strangers, they'll, I don't know you, and they'll keep getting the better reward for a while. But if they're close affiliates, that's when it kicks in, right? When the chimpanzee knows the other chimpanzee who's being cheated, it matters. Are we any different than that, right? We are always more likely to stand up for injustice when it's someone we know, someone we care about, someone we identify as one of us, right? And the trick, as we've seen now more than ever, is getting to see all humans as one of us. We'll talk about that in a second. But the intolerance to inequity has now been seen in both directions in many species. So we can sort of check that off the list. Now, I want to come back to this behavior in a minute, because recognizing somebody else being cheated and doing something about it, that's also hard to explain in terms of evolution, right? Because natural selection just would reward you, right? Natural selection works on the success or failure of individuals, right? Populations evolve, but through the death or survival of individuals. Why would I ever benefit from standing up from your injustice? Right? This is a problem. It's a conundrum. It's a pickle for us biologists to explain. I'll come back to it. I want to cover the first part, the fairness part first. So the next part of the fairness modality is the existence of rules, laws, norms. That's going to be absolutely crucial for any system of justice. And you might be tempted to think that humans are the only ones that have these rules that we all have to follow and punishments and so forth. But again, not true. Any social species actually has a very elaborate etiquette associated with various behaviors. For example, mating and courtship rituals. There's an etiquette, there's rules to follow. You're punished if you don't do it right? Isn't that true, humans? But it's not just courtship, there's feeding behavior. So a lot of animals eat communally, so eating is a social behavior in these animals, and there's rules to follow. And you will be punished meaning not getting your fill if you don't follow those rules. Some of the best documented behavioral rules in animals comes from wolves. And you'll recognize this because a lot of it's true in dogs as well, which are descended from wolves, of course. So wolves are very, very playful animals, and play is actually a very important part of their social life. And they play, and they wrestle, and they throw each other around. And as a non-wolf, as most of us are, it looks like fighting, but it's definitely not fighting. Because if a wolf were to bite another wolf with full force, puncture every time, break limbs, it would be, a fight does not last very long in a wolf. But they can play all day, every day. So what do? They follow the rules of play. The first rule of play is you don't sneak attack. So wolves will do this. If they want to play, they have to signal to the other player that play is about to commence. How do they do this? They do what's called the play bow. Their hindquarters go high in the air, their head goes down, and their legs go parallel to the front. Anybody seen a dog do this? Right before they pounce? Right? So that's actually a scripted signal that they give to say, by the way, don't misinterpret what I'm about to do to you. We'll play. It's all good. But if you sneak attack, you'll be punished, and I'll get to the punishments in a second. Another rule that they have, well, I already covered one of them, is they weaken their bites, right, and their tumbles. They don't hurt each other. And if you hurt another wolf, you've broken the rules. A third rule is you have to handicap yourself if you're a larger or stronger wolf. So if you want to play with a wolf that's smaller than you, you have to army crawl, and sometimes even approach from the underside. Why? Because that gives you a disadvantage. Who would want to play with you if you're going to clean their clock every time? But play is important to their social structure. So if I'm a big, strong wolf, if I want to play in the game, I have to lower myself, so to speak, literally, and get someone to play with me by putting myself at a disadvantage. So the handicap system is strict, and that's one of the rules. Okay, so now we've covered some of the rules. What happens when a wolf breaks the rules? Does anybody know, by the way? What happens to a wolf who breaks the rules? Yes, ma'am?
He gets kicked out of the group.
He gets kicked out for a while. He gets shunned. No one will play, he can't eat with the group, and they will literally turn their backs to said wolf. He's in timeout. Wolves give timeouts, right? We didn't invent social removal from the group as a punishment, right? Lots of species do this. Removal from the social unit is felt as a punishment in social species. That's why it hurts a child's feelings to say, go to your room, right? Or any other removal from the group, that's a punishment. And so the wolves do this. They're shunned from the pack temporarily. And by the way, wolves also will occasionally engage in corporal punishment. They'll actually do physical harm, but only in extreme cases. Again, maybe, hopefully, like human parents. But anyway, this social shunning is the beginning of the punishment system. However, the shunning doesn't last forever. They have to eventually make their way back in. Does anybody know what has to happen for them to be allowed back in the game? They have to say they're sorry. They have to apologize. How do they apologize? There's a signal for this. Tail down, ears down, head down. You guys ever seen the guilty dog look? Right? Dogs didn't make this up. This is a borrowed signal. It's actually the signal for submission in wolves. They're giving the submissive signal. And there's, any of you who've ever given an apology, there's nothing more submissive than saying you're sorry. I've heard. I don't do it myself. But if you do say you're sorry, it's a very submissive thing to do. And so that's why it's a borrowed signal in wolves. By the way, humans reconcile with another borrowed signal, the signal that we use for greeting. That's why you shake your hands both when you're meeting someone and after a fight, or you hug or you kiss or whatever. Right? We have borrowed signals there too. That's in another chapter. Anyway, but the point is that apologies have to be made for a wolf to be reintegrated into the social group. So they do have a system of rules, of laws, of norms, a way to punish the offenders and reward those who follow the rules, and then of course a way to reintegrate into the group. And that reintegration into the group is crucial. There's an apology, there's reparation, so usually if a wolf has harmed another wolf, they'll do the licking and the grooming behaviors. So they're trying to repair the damage, and then they're reintegrated into the group. Bonobos have very similar types of rules associated with food sharing. So bonobos have a sex ritual when they eat. I don't know if those of you who know anything about bonobos, they're extremely sexual species. And they have a sex ritual that goes along with food sharing. Again, there's a proper way to do it. There's etiquette, and you're punished, and you'll miss your meal if you don't play the game properly. So my point is that there are these systems of rules and laws, and there are punishments and rewards. Humans didn't invent this. It's instinctual. We know that this is what it takes to have a harmonious social structure. But that gets us back to the same problem we had with recognizing somebody else's inequity. Is if evolution works because I succeed or fail, why would it ever pay off for me to help someone who's unfortunate, who is less fortunate, or handicap myself, or whatever? Why would it not just be purely self-directed behavior? And this was a conundrum for some time in evolutionary biology, is why humans are nice to each other, even when they're not related or they don't know each other. Why would you help a homeless person ever? That's a non-biological thing to do, a non-Darwinian thing to do to help a competitor. Well, so first of all, I think that's a little harsh, but also it fails to recognize the way that altruism works. So altruism was once thought as a human institution, and then some researchers in Costa Rica noticed it in bats. So vampire bats we're talking about here. So I have to give you a short little primer about vampire bats to understand it. So vampire bats are very small flying mammals, and they get their nourishment usually from one nightly meal, and so they're nocturnal, and they hunt for usually large mammals, cows, horses, and they get one nightly feeding, and they feed a lot, about 35% of their body weight, and then they come back for the day. And if they miss one night, they're at risk of starvation. They might starve. They definitely can't miss 2 nights of feeding. If they miss 2 nights of feeding, they're dead. Because they have very fast metabolism. Any flying mammal or a flying animal has a very fast metabolism and no fat deposits, really. Because you couldn't do that and still fly. So these bats, they did this behavior. And so the researchers who studied them would notice that sometimes they'd eat, sometimes they wouldn't, but they never bothered looking what they're doing during the daytime. They just, oh, well, they're sleeping. By the way, biology is a life lesson in you only find what you're looking for, right? So no one asked what these bats were doing during the day. They said, oh, they're sleeping. Well, they're doing a lot more than that. It turns out that if a bat has not eaten, has not been successful, he or she will go to another bat that was successful and beg for food. That's surprising enough, but even more surprising is the other bat will agree sometimes. And how do they feed? So this is where it gets a little gross. They regurgitate about 1/3 of their last meal into the mouth of the beggar. So that's about 10% of the body weight, but 1/3 of the last meal into the mouth of the beggar. So, okay, it's gross. You have the most disgusting creatures ever vomiting blood into the mouth of each other. It's gross, right? But also, it's beautiful, right? You have a hungry animal begging for help, and one who's in a position to do it agrees, and they both live to see another day. So I think it's poetic, and I'd like to show you a video of it. But it's not so gruesome, you can barely see what's going on. But this is, again, one of those videos that sort of has to be seen to be believed. And this goes on for a little bit long, so I'll keep talking, but here they are. See, they're cute, right? So this is infrared, this is pitch black in here, you couldn't see anything if you're looking at infrared. There's the guy who's going to do the feeding, and you'll notice he wasn't shy. He walked right up. And they're feeding each other. Again, the one who's hungry is sitting there asking. The feeder comes over to him and feeds willingly. Pretty cool, huh? Nobody thought bats did this because, again, no one thought to ask. No one asked what they were doing during the daytime. Now, just in case you're skeptical, because you don't see a lot of blood transferring, the way they did the studies, they just weigh them. So they would weigh them when they come back. When a meal is 35% of your body weight, that shows up on the scales. And then when they would feed, they noticed it was about 1/3 of that meal usually gets transferred. So about 10% of the body weight gets moved from one bat to another, and they can document that. So why would the bats do this? If you're a bat that just had a great night, what's in it for you to help? If you have this cold Darwinian view of survival of the fittest, a loathsome phrase that I hope will fall out of fashion soon, but if you have that view, why should you ever help? Because there's nothing in it for you. And in fact, you're helping a competitor. Everything they tell us about every individual is nothing but a competitor seems to be wrong here. Well, as good scientists, they didn't just do this one night and publish it. They did it night after night after night. And you know what they noticed? That sometimes when the bat who helped, when the bat who needed help approached, and then when he was in the position to help, he would help back. However, if a bat was snubbed, so if I come up hungry, you don't help me, I make it through the night, I eat the next night, here you come, asking for some, and they wouldn't share back. So these bats kept track of who shared with whom on a one-to-one relationship. And if you were naughty, you didn't get. So now think about it in Darwinian terms. What's in it for you to share is you might make it the next time you're about to starve. So if you can give up a little bit now, it might save your life later. So it's not just pure altruism, it's reciprocal altruism. It's the idea of, we do this, and if you're a bat, the attitude is, that's just what you do. You know, I don't know that they do the cold calculations all the time, it's just instinct. That's just what you do. So when it comes to justice and fairness, that's just what we do, right? And I've often said, if you're going to define all the reasons that justice exists and fairness exists, you're going to, I think, end up in a lot of rhetorical circles that end up saying it's just what you do. It's just the right thing to do. And I have an answer for that, and it's instinct. It's the right thing to do because it's our instinct as social mammals. And thank God, by the way, that we are the smartest ones on the planet, also then very social. If we were antisocial and became very cognitively advanced, I don't know that these rules would play out. So that's a little disturbing to think about. Okay. The lesson here that biologists have learned, and by the way, reciprocal altruism has now, again, been documented in all kinds of species, is that it is good for you to be nice to somebody else, as long as three things are true about your species. The first thing is you have to be a highly social species that's interactive. Second thing is you have to live in small communities, so without a lot of in and out members, migration in and out. And third is you have to have a big brain, because you have to be able to keep track of who's naughty and who's nice. So if all of those three things are true, then you're a species that's a good candidate for altruism. And by the way, all of those things were very true all of our history as apes in Africa. Okay, so that gets us to the next topic, which is the other half of justice, fairness fit to the real other directed behaviors, true altruism and empathy and compassion. Because it's not enough to just say, well, I follow the rules, so I'm a just person. We really expect more for that. And the moral aspect, by the way, is really what brings us, I think, together in this community. We're not just a community that's about putting people in prison when they break the rules, right? We're a community that's about working for a just world more broadly. So I think this is the most important part of animal behavior. So it turns out, though, that animals are capable of empathy. And I'm going to define empathy as emotional contagion. So it's when you sort of catch the emotion that another animal or another human is experiencing. So they're sad, so you become sad for them. You feel their pain. And it works the other way too. You're exuberant when your football team scores whatever the unit of points are in football. Yeah, right. You cheer. Nothing happened to you, but you cheer for them. It's like you're a part of that exuberation, and it's all very contagious. If you're in that social group, right? Because if the team that you're not, that's not you, then you don't feel it that way. But this is called emotional contagion in animal behavior, and it's been studied way back since the 1950s, where they knew that they could take laboratory animals, and these are, by the way, all the experiments I've talked about so far are very humane. So there's some inhumane experiments that were done early on, where they would force animals to treat each other cruelly. So a mouse would have to push a lever in order to get food, but that same lever also shocked a comrade, right? And this was torture both for the shocker, or for the shocked one and the shocker, because they would become very trepidatious. They have no wish to hurt their fellow members, and they will resist pulling it. They've seen this in monkeys, and they have to train them to do all these elaborate tests. The study just came out last week where they trained a mouse to complete a maze underwater in order to liberate a comrade from a trap. And where their life wasn't in danger, but so this mouse will go underwater, complete the maze to lift up. And they gave that mouse a choice, a piece of chocolate or go do this maze and help somebody. And they do the maze every time, right? So that's altruism, right? So they're passing up a reward to help. So we have this empathy and this compassion. It only works, by the way, when the mouse is in distress, right? So they have to shock the mouse. Not the one doing the maze, the one who's trapped. So they have to activate that empathy by putting it in a stressful situation. But the point is we have that programming to recognize the suffering of others. All animals do it, and we do it. And so that emotion or emotional capability of empathy grew out of a skill we call perspective taking. So perspective taking is what I do when I try to see the world through your eyes. And sometimes that's just literally like my ability to see that you're looking this way while I'm looking that way, right? And that's useful if you're trying to organize a hunt. And I'm not just talking about humans, other animals hunt in coordinated fashion. So you can only hunt in a coordinated fashion if you can appreciate somebody else's point of view. And I mean that literally point of view. So empathy and perspective taking are linked in the neural circuitry of our brain by these structures called mirror neurons. Now mirror neurons have somewhat fallen out of fashion because some people think they're not really the engine of this, but they're merely reflective of something. So I didn't mean to just pun that. But they're reflective of some underlying common neural circuitry. But the point is that there's something in our brains that allows us to take perspective from other people. And that also is what leads to empathy. And if you need more convincing of this, it's the same system that causes contagious yawning. She just yawned. I just mentioned the word yawn and she yawned. What does yawning have to do with this? Well, contagious yawning happens because when you witness someone yawning or talk about it, as to see half the room is now yawning, you take that perspective so well in your brain that you actually boot up the yawning program. You mirror that so much that it actually happens. And guess what? You catch yawns from your family and friends more than from strangers. So everyone that yawned when I did, that means you like me. Closely affiliated. I appreciate that very much. Those of you who didn't yawn, I noticed. But the point is that yawning and empathy are linked. You will catch yawns more from those who you are closely affiliated with, the same way that you'll empathize with them better. By the way, you can catch yawns from your dog and vice versa. Your dog can catch yawns from you. It's all connected. And it's part of that perspective taking where we actually have the ability to imagine what somebody else is going through, so to speak, and whatever flavor that takes. And some evidence for this, besides just the work on mirror neurons, is that individuals who suffer from problems in perspective taking, I'm thinking of psychopaths, for example, are absolutely incapable of empathy, and they don't catch yawns. Weird, right? So if you didn't believe me before, hopefully you do now. And the same thing with some people on the autism spectrum sometimes have a hard time understanding the emotion of other people. They have no lack of empathy, I'm not saying that, but they sometimes don't always understand the emotional presentation of other individuals. They also don't catch yawns, at least not as much. So this is all connected. So we are programmed to feel empathy for other creatures. And by the way, this is all true in animals as well. There are animal models of the autism spectrum. Okay. So we're hardwired for this empathy and this compassion. But it always works when we are affiliated, right? And it always works less so when we're not. And this, of course, is what in the human condition leads to tribalism, right? About how you care about the people that you consider in your tribe, whatever that tribe is. And you care a lot less about people that don't look like you far away, right? It's much easier to dehumanize them because you don't catch yawns from them, so you don't care as much about their suffering. So there's something to be said here about lessons for our current system of justice. And I'm thinking now globally. For one thing, is anyone else concerned that our children in our schools do not learn empathy? Because empathy is a skill that must be developed, right? So we do very, very little for emotional education of our children, right? We do a little to socialize them. We teach them to follow the rules, don't we? Oh my gosh. When the kids come home from school and the list of things they can and can't do, we cover that real, real well. But we don't cover what they should do when a classmate is crying. Do we ever have that lesson in school? Might we think about it? Because empathy, like any other skill, takes practice. You have to nurture it. You have to develop it. The more you do, the more you will do. So I think that's our first lesson if we actually care about building a just world and learning from our animal friends. We know that empathy is an instinct and that it needs to be developed. And I mean, I hate to get too political, but how can you not right now? And we saw the individuals who are the most likely to not care about the other are the individuals that have the least contact with any other, right? So the most insular regions of our country are where you tend to find the most racism, right? And that's because empathy is never activated your whole childhood towards certain groups. It's not like you're going to go out of your way to kill anybody necessarily, but you don't catch yawns from them. Is what I mean. I'm saying that metaphorically. Right? They're not in the in-group. And so I don't think that's a coincidence. And of course, I'm not the first to say that, but I think there's a biological reason for that. Another lesson that I think is pretty important is if we go back to those wolves. One thing is clear. We've got the coercion down. We've got the punishment down, the rules. We do that part really well. And then we just stop. I am of the opinion that any justice system that works with our natural biological instincts is destined to do well. Any justice system that goes against our natural inclinations is destined to fail. Well, let's look at our justice system a lot of times. After an infraction, a serious infraction is made, we got the removal from the social unit part down. We do that, and then what? No reparations, no restoration of relationship, and no reintegration to the social group. We don't do any of the things that animals need to do to reintegrate, right? We don't repair the relationship. Reparation is a big one. We don't repair the relationship. We don't even allow for the apology. And we certainly don't allow for reintegration. And so, if you see prisoners like ourselves as animals, all of our natural instincts to be a part of a social group are just dashed. There's no incentive. You're not even allowed to vote. You're not part of the group. So there is nothing in your brain desiring you to be a functional part of that group when you've been told you're permanently not one, right? So that goes against our natural instincts. But guess what? There are criminal justice systems in other parts of the world that do it exactly the opposite, right? They concentrate on reparation and reintegration and preparing them to be productive and welcomed members of society, and they're successful. There was a headline out of Sweden the other day that there's a prison crisis. There's not enough prisoners for the prison industry in Sweden, right? Because they reintegrate them so well. And why do they do that? Is they treat people as animals. And I mean that in a good way. They treat them as the animals we are, meaning we have needs, we have instincts, and when you work with those needs and instincts, It works. You can reintegrate that wolf. So I do think there's a lot to learn there. I guess my final thought on this, I'm right at 45 minutes, so I timed this right. My final thought of that is the two things we have for justice that we can learn from animals is encouraging empathy, so you build the social context early, and then social reintegration. Because social mammals have a need to be a part of a social group. Psychologists have been telling us that for decades. Of course, humans have a need to belong. But it's bigger than that, I think, and it's older than that. It's a million years old lesson here, is that humans are a social species, and we have need for these social contexts. We get our energy from our social context. And when we build our criminal justice system in concert with those social needs, I think we have a good shot at success. And when we don't, we don't. All right, thank you very much. I'd be happy to take all of your questions now. And I do want to say I'll give the last word to Charles Darwin himself, who 150 years ago, I think, nailed it right in the head that humans and animals are not so different. Okay. Any questions from the crowd here? Yes, sir.
Yeah, question about extending empathy or compassion. So as animals, we have empathetic relations with those who are part of our tribe, those who are part of our immediate unit. But of course, what we need in the world is to extend it, not just to fight racism and so forth, but at this point in time to extend it globally.
Of course.
What in biology gives us that ability, or is this a extra biological factor?
Well, so the question was, what allows us to go beyond our tribe and think of ourselves as a global community, and is there a biological way to do that? Having it be extra biological, I think, is our only choice at this point. We live too far away. We're all over the planet. My thoughts on how you can trigger the social instinct is to make sure that we are well integrated with people. You don't have to be, living in purely integrated communities, but what I mean is to feel like we're part of the world and they're part of us. So to know people in faraway places, and we have the technology to do this without actually going to those places, right? And I think there have been studies on that show that children who have, exchange programs with certain countries, they grow up and years later have a certain affection for that country because, oh yeah, there was a kid from Spain and he spent a year in our class. You can do that with Skype, you can do that with other things. So, I think anything that broadens your sense of community is good. At the same time, I also think we need to tear down all the things that make that impossible, or that emphasize that. But at the same time, we also need community. So it's like we're pulling on both ends of the rope a little bit because you don't have a community. If everybody's in the community, there's no community, right? So you have to have the community, capital C, but you also have to have your local group that supports you socially and that understands you and that goes through life the way that you go through life. So both are important, and having those work in concert is a challenge. Yes, sir, in the back.
So you were talking about wolves, and you said that the wolf. So usually wolves run in packs, correct?
That's right.
So I have a two-part question. If does the leader of the wolf pack get to play with the regular wolves in the pack? And if the leader were to not play with the rules of the game, what would the pack do to the leader?
Okay, so he asked about wolf packs, and if the leader is the biggest and strongest one, what happens when he tries to play? So one part of the story I left out is that wolves are extremely playful as juveniles. Adults, wolves do very little playing. Adult wolves have a very strange social structure. You have basically an alpha who's allowed to reproduce, and his siblings are not. So they're the sort of units of the group there, and they don't play. Dogs play all through their lives because part of what domesticated them is they're sort of permanently juvenile. So your dog is playful all throughout life because he's basically just a kid all his life. But the adult wolves don't do much play. So all of the work that I described to you before is with juvenile wolves. So that's a bit of a bummer. Yes?
These concepts of justice and compassion are very interesting to learn more about in nature and biology. What I think about though is other aspects of biology, such as competition, let's say sexual reproduction. For example, let's say a female praying mantis is trying to decapitate her lover during coitus. So I was wondering, observed justice or compassion in instances which may seem to be a conflict.
Okay, so this is touching on a very difficult and long conversation. He asked about what about when there's clear competition between individuals. So I only concentrate on this talk on the sort of pro-social side of my book. There's several chapters, and I introduce them by saying it's not all gumdrops and rainbows out there. Also, species are in conflict, and individuals are in conflict with each other. And so we are a mix of pro-social and antisocial instincts. I'm going to skip the insect reference for just a minute, but we are a swirl of pro-social and antisocial instincts. But these can be triggered and switched at will. For example, not at will, but on a dime. Those of you with siblings, anybody here with siblings, right? So you've probably fought with your siblings quite a bit, right? So you're going to compete with them for parental resources. We'll just say it that way. But what happens when somebody outside the family picks on your sibling? Boom, then you close in and immediately you're part of the group again, right? So there's that pro-social instinct, and then there's the antisocial competitive instincts. So they can be triggered, and even on a dime like that, they can switch back and forth. So that's why I said these aren't necessarily easy answers, because we do live on a planet with 7 billion other people. So, and we are going to be in competition from time to time. I'm not going to wish that we were as simple as to say, oh, we just be pro-social and that's it. But it's a matter of tempering our antisocial instincts and favoring our pro-social ones, which, by the way, we've done a lot of. I mean, if you look at just the general statistics on violence in the world, if you're in a developed country now, you are less likely to die by violent means now than ever in the history of the world, by a lot, right? So we have criminalized murder in a way that's a recent development in the history of our species, right? Criminalizing murder is a recent thing, or at least effectively criminalizing it. Very few people kill someone to get away with it now. And theft even, right? Life 200 years ago was a lot worse than it is now. 200 years before that, and so on. So we have figured out how to do some of this, basically by just punishing the antisocial stuff as much as we can. But I don't think we've done enough to promote the pro-social stuff. That's my own thought, especially now. And by the way, this is a real public health stat. Like 25–30% of college-age students, which is a lot of people in this room, suffer from stress and anxiety. I bet there's some people in this room who are pretty stressed out most of the time. And I think that's because we have this high-stakes testing all the time. We train our students to be stressed all the time instead of have emotional intelligence and social skills and care about each other and think about each other as more than a competitor on a test score. I think we reap what we sow in that regard. Peter.
Seems to me that in many cases, maybe even all too often, I'll call it anti-evolution crowd are also the people who are most into punitive versus restorative justice. Number one, do you think there's a merit to that, some foundation to that view? And does it fit in with what you're describing as far as the evolutionary and biological roots of justice?
Okay, so the question was, there are some people who don't believe in evolution and shared ancestry at all, and Peter has noticed a correlation that they also tend to favor punitive justice rather than restorative justice. Did I get the question right for the first part?
Yeah, I don't know if the linkage is coincidental or just...
I think that's more of a political connection, actually. I think those are both indicators of a different problem. However, it does mean that I can't use this argument against them because they wouldn't believe that there's any connection between human and animal behavior, right? And by the way, that's absolutely true that they are not at all moved by examples of empathy and compassion in animals. And I've had these arguments with creationists about this. And they're not at all moved by it. I mean, if you guys want to be moved by animal compassion, you can look it up on YouTube. There's a chimpanzee called Knuckles. And Knuckles has cerebral palsy, and he's in a preserve with it's in a chimp rescue in Florida. And you should see how the other chimps treat Knuckles. I mean, if that's not compassion, and I mean, in the wild, I don't know if that would be the case, but all their needs are met and they're in captivity. And chimps, by the way, are very aggressive. They're nasty, they're pushing each other around, they're just not a very particularly nice species to each other. But Knuckles never gets a scratch. You know, they know that he has limitations in how he can move and what he can do. He bumps into them and pushes them and never gets any bite back, literally. You know, if they're not feeling something, then what's that? You know? But a lot of creationists would say, well, animals are just, you know, input, output, stimulus, response. There's nothing to that. And my response is, prove it. Because I have a whole lot of evidence that they're not, that they're more than that. What was the second part of your question?
I'm just wondering if the linkage between, say, creationists and punitive justice is
Well,
identical.
so I've actually written a little bit about the evolutionary biology of religious belief. I don't have time to get into that today. Yes, sir, Rebecca.
You said that Sweden had a lack of prisoners because of the way that they're integrating inmates into society. Nonetheless, that might not work here in the U.S. because of it's a different culture. So I was going to ask you, would you say that depriving criminals from voting and benefits and whatnot is a way to deter others from committing crimes? I mean, we could all be out there committing crimes, but we're here trying to get
Right.
education.
So what I would, as a scientist, I just go to the evidence. The evidence that removing voting rights from felons deters crime is non-existent. There's no evidence that that works. I think there's, and I'm not a criminologist, so this is where I have to say I don't know. And by the way, in Sweden, they don't just say, oh, you're a murderer, let's teach you how to fix cars and go on your way. I mean, there's plenty of people that are in prison for the rest of their life in Sweden, okay? I don't want to say that. But the point is that they can get to the point where they can reintegrate because of the world that waits for them when they do. And I'm not saying here we could just start adopting those policies immediately would work. We have a great deal of social change that would be necessary for that. But the point is, psychologically, when you take a person away their right to vote, you take away their right to get a job in a lot of cases because you have to staple that felony conviction on your job application. So their ability to defend for themselves and provide for their family, all of those things, you take that away. What's their incentive to be good in that sense? So that's the psychological side. But the biological side, it also tells them you're not a member of our community, or you're not a real member of our community. So if they don't feel like a member of the community, so it's, I love these tautologies. If they don't feel like a member of the community, they don't feel like a member of the community. So there's no, they're not invested. They don't care. Why would they? The community doesn't care about them. Why should they care about the community? And I'm not a criminologist, so I have to say, it just seems that the ones that fit our biology are doing a lot better than we are. Yes?
I wanted to ask you, since your argument is that justice is instinct or behavior, how strong is that argument for us that is a species that constantly changes punishments, norms, and rules compared to other animals?
That's a great question because so her question was about the biological instinct about justice and how justice or rules and norms change over time in our species. So the first thing to remember is that in wolves and all these other creatures that I'm talking about rules, they just know, they don't know the rules themselves, but they respond to the social pressures for that. And that's where the commonality is. The rules themselves can change. That there are rules that you have to follow, that's the important part. And that's what is instinctual. So it doesn't really matter what the rules are. And in fact, we live in countries that have vastly different things that are forbidden and so on and so forth. And we all sort of learn the rules and you do what you're supposed to do. But what we're evolved to do is to recognize the system of rules and then work within it. And by the way, and test the limits too, right? I mean, we do that too. It's what can I get away with? That's that competitive side, right? Anybody with young kids know that they're always testing those boundaries. Is he really going to take that away from me if I do that? You know, that's part of it too. But the fact that we have the rules is the common part, I think. But the rules themselves don't matter. And they change over time and in different places. Oh, just to give you an example of that. So there have been experiments with rhesus macaques in Japan where they took a troop of them, a whole troop, and raised their juveniles. I don't remember what happened, but they separated the adults from it's part of the rescue program, and they separated the juveniles from the adults. And then the juveniles lived in captivity, but the best they could to mimic how they would really live, and they let them out in the wild, and their social dynamics are totally different. But they have social dynamics is the point. So they have rules and they have roles. What those actually rules and roles are can change, and that's just more of a matter of the environment. What's genetic is just the scaffolding to do that. 1 second. Yes, sir.
So you stressed how important it was for empathy to be taught, especially to children, because if not, they'll develop, without learning compassion. So what do we, how do we tackle or wrestle with the problem that adults who have never learned empathy, and are we just supposed to wait for them to die and teach their kids, or?
Well, the question of what to do with adults who never learn empathy is a very difficult one, and a friend of mine is a therapist in San Francisco who's for 20 years thought that there's no such thing as someone who's beyond that, and after 20 years he's not so sure anymore. But I do think it's like learning language, that there's a sensitive period of your life where it's easy to do this and it's easy to shape, and then there's a period past which it's a lot harder. So as someone who learned a language as an adult, I'm never going to be very good at it. But I can, order food and even talk to my daughter, but I will never sound like a native speaker, right? And so I don't know past a certain point whether you can really get that. I mean, this is emotional rather than linguistic. I mean, there's different parts of the brain and all that, but I think there is a sensitive period. But how we actually do it is, I think, pretty easy to do. And my son goes to a charter school, and because he has a longer day, they have like 2 extra hours in their day. They have a class called Mind, Body, Heart every day. And he came home the other day, we were all sitting, and a friend of mine who happened to be over at that time was playing a video game, and she said, "Oh, I'm terrible at this." And my son was like, "Don't say that. You're going to hurt your feelings." That's my boy. But the point is, and of course we unpacked it. I was like, he's like, in school they tell us you have this invisible bucket and you take things. He had this whole explanation about it. But the point is, he's now sensitive to that. He was a sensitive boy already, but it's really I was like, every kid needs this mind, body, heart, because he's now going to be growing up extremely aware of, and by the way, these are the notes we get home from school too, he saw somebody who didn't have a seat and he gave up his seat and all this stuff. That's what we should be teaching kids. I don't care. They send us these addition and subtraction flashcards, and I put them in the garbage because that's just, come on, it's fine. Okay, yes, sir.
There's a good argument for saying that there's some component of empathy in punitive justice. It works like this: you feel for the person who was harmed, giving out your and then you feel the pain, and then you feel what might be the desire to retaliate from that person, and then you want the person who did that to feel the brunt of that retaliation. I wonder if there's anything working on the strictly biological level.
I think so, and in fact, I think in our species, but here's the thing: we don't do that either, at least not very well. We might feel it, but you feel it in isolation. But in a lot of traditional societies, and Jared Diamond has written a lot about the way justice works in traditional societies. So he's gone around to pre-agricultural communities in New Guinea and on basic. And the way they establish justice is very, very different, but it's restorative. It's about repairing the relationship. The aggrieved party, whether it's the father or son, or somebody who was killed, whatever, or theft, damaged property, and the assailant, the perpetrator, they sit down together with an elder or somebody, and they work through the problem. They discuss it, and they decide, the elder usually decides what is necessary to make that person whole again, what reparation is appropriate. And they do it. And sometimes it's a price, it's a dollar amount in the equivalent of resources, and other times they have to sort of do whatever, but they repair the relationship. And when the debt is gone, reintegration, and the point is that they repair the relationship. They don't just lock away and throw away the key. And by the way, capital punishment is unheard of in traditional societies as an organized thing. Revenge killing, absolutely, right? But that's what we would call extrajudicial. But when you actually follow the process in traditional societies, there's no capital punishment.
That would suggest that if you don't repair the relationship, the retaliatory instinct.
That's what I would say. Yeah, absolutely. So if we concentrate on repairing the relationship and repairing whatever went wrong, it's a better outcome. And the idea that we need the punishment as a deterrent, like I said, if that were true, then why would we have hate crime? We're so good at the punitive part, we should see an elevation in
Why don't we stop there? And I'm sure Dr. Lentz will stay around for us.
Yep. Thank you.